Patricia, Patty, Gable stood at Sarah Miller's doorstep with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the laminated violation notice. Through the half-open door, she could see the medical equipment, hear the soft beeping that marked the rhythm of a dying child's heartbeat. "Mrs. Miller, I understand you're going through a difficult time," Patty said, her voice dripping with the kind of synthetic sympathy that wouldn't fool anyone. "But the Homeowners Association has zero tolerance for noise violations. Your request to have motorcycles, driving through Oakwood Meadows is absolutely out of the question." Sarah's face, already hollowed by weeks of sleepless nights, crumpled. "It's just one day. Please. He's dying. He just wants to feel. I don't make the rules, dear. I enforce them. Property values don't maintain themselves." Patty thrust the papers forward. "This is a cease and desist notice. If any motorcycles enter this community, you will be fined $1,500 per vehicle, and I will personally ensure legal action is taken." She glanced past Sarah toward the bedroom where 10-year-old Toby lay, barely visible through the doorway. "I'm very sorry for your situation, but rules are rules." She turned on her heel and walked back to her pristine white Mercedes, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, the notice trembling in her hands. What Patty couldn't see, was the man sitting on a worn Harley-Davidson 3 blocks away, close enough to hear every word through the phone Sarah had left on speaker, tucked in her pocket. "Frank, Gunner." Henderson's jaw tightened as he listened, his weathered hands gripping the handlebars until his knuckles turned white. He ended the call and stared down the perfectly manicured street of Oakwood Meadows, then pulled out his own phone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed, "Change of plans. We're not asking permission anymore." 3 weeks earlier, Toby Miller had asked his mother a question that would haunt her forever. "Mom, what does dying feel like?" They were sitting in his bedroom, though bedroom was a generous term for what had become a medical facility crammed into a 12-by-12 space. The cheerful dinosaur wallpaper from his 6th birthday now served as a backdrop for an enforced stand, a morphine pump, and a hospital bed that made terrible hydraulic sounds whenever Sarah adjusted it. Toby's body had become a stranger to him. The osteosarcoma had started in his right leg, but cancer doesn't respect boundaries. It had spread to his lungs, turning each breath into a conscious effort, a negotiation with his own ribcage. His oncologist, a kind woman who cried in her car after appointments, had given him 3 months. That had been 4 months ago. Toby was running on borrowed time, and the interest was compounding daily. "Dying," Sarah had said carefully, choosing her words like a bomb disposal expert cutting wires, "is like going to sleep." But Toby shook his head, a gesture that seemed to cost him enormous energy. "No, it's not like sleeping. Sleeping is soft. This is—" He struggled for the word, his morphine-clouded mind reaching for something just out of grasp. "This is freezing. Everything's getting colder and quieter, like the world is turning down the volume." Sarah's heart cracked a little more. "What do you need, baby? What would help?" Toby's eyes, still bright despite everything else fading, found hers. "I want to feel Dad again." Toby's father, Marcus Miller, had died when Toby was 5. A brain aneurysm, sudden and merciless. No goodbyes, no final words, just there one morning, gone by lunch. Marcus had been a motorcycle mechanic, the kind of man who spoke more fluently to engines than to people. His small garage had smelled of motor oil, gasoline, and metal shavings, a perfume that Toby associated with safety. The clearest memory Toby had of his father was sound. Marcus would roll a bike into the garage bay, and Toby would sit on his little stool in the corner, wearing oversized ear protection that kept sliding down his head. Marcus would turn the key, and the engine would cough to life, a deep, rattling thunder that Toby could feel in his chest, his bones, his teeth. The whole building would vibrate. The tools on the pegboard would dance. The concrete floor would hum. It was a sound that said, strength, power, life. After Marcus died, Sarah had sold the garage. She couldn't bear to keep it, couldn't stand to smell the oil without him. She'd donated most of his tools, kept only his favorite wrench and his leather jacket. The bikes were sold to pay for the funeral. But Toby had never forgotten that sound. And now, trapped in a body that was shutting down piece by piece, surrounded by the antiseptic silence of hospice care, Toby wanted desperately to feel that thunder one more time. Not hear it, Feel it. He wanted the vibration in his chest, the rumble in his bones. He wanted to remember what it felt like to be shaken by something powerful and alive. I want to hear Dad's voice, he told Sarah, his words slurring slightly from the medication. The engine voice. Sarah had tried everything she could think of within the prison of their suburban home. She'd found videos on YouTube, compilations of Harley-Davidson's revving, drag races, motorcycle rallies. She'd played them on the TV, turned the volume up as high as it would go. Toby had listened politely, then shook his head. It's not the same. It's flat. I need to feel it. Sarah had bought a subwoofer, the kind teenage boys used to rattle their neighbors' windows. She'd played the videos again, bass cranked to maximum. The pictures on the wall had buzzed. The medications on the nightstand had vibrated. Toby had smiled weakly. Better. But it's still fake. I can tell. What do you need, baby? Tell me exactly what you need. Toby's answer was simple and impossible. I need a real motorcycle. Right outside my window. Close enough to shake the glass. Sarah Miller had never been inside a biker bar before. She'd driven past the Rusty Piston 1,000 times. It was impossible to miss, sitting at the edge of town like a middle finger to polite society. The building was a converted gas station, its windows painted black, its parking lot perpetually full of chrome and leather. The sign above the door featured a cartoon skull wearing a bandana, permanently grinning. Normal Sarah, the Sarah from before cancer, before death sentences, before watching her son slowly disappear, would never have gone within 50 feet of this place. Normal Sarah wore cardigans and went to PTA meetings and worried about things like whether the neighbors were judging her lawn care. But normal Sarah was gone. She'd died somewhere between the second and third round of chemotherapy, been buried alongside the hope that her son might live to see middle school. The woman who pushed open the door of the Rusty Piston at 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon was someone new. Someone desperate. Someone who had nothing left to lose because the only thing that mattered was already leaving. The bar went quiet when she entered. Sarah stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, wearing yoga pants and a faded sweatshirt with a coffee stain on the sleeve. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, a mother who'd forgotten to take care of herself because all her care was directed elsewhere. 15 men and 3 women stared at her from various positions around the bar. They were a catalog of ink and leather, tribal tattoos, club patches, boots that could probably kick through a car door. The jukebox was playing something with a lot of bass and very little melody. The air smelled like beer and motor oil and something indefinably male. Sarah's hands were shaking, but she stepped inside anyway. The door swung shut behind her with a final sounding click. I need help, she said. Her voice cracked halfway through. Nobody moved. Several bikers exchanged glances. One woman, her arms covered in sleeve tattoos of roses and skulls, leaned forward slightly, interested. I need someone to make noise, Sarah continued. A lot of noise. Outside my house. For my son. He's dying, and he wants to hear a motorcycle engine, and I don't know anyone who. Her voice broke completely. The bartender, a mountain of a man with a beard that reached his chest, cleared his throat. Ma'am, are you lost? No. Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scrolled through her photos, found the one she needed. She held it up, turning slowly so everyone could see. The photo showed Toby from 6 months ago, before the cancer had really taken hold. He was sitting in a wheelchair at a motorcycle show, holding a toy Harley-Davidson, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Marcus's leather jacket was draped over his thin shoulders, comically oversized. His name is Toby. He's 10 years old. He has osteosarcoma, bone cancer. It's in his lungs now. The doctors say he has days, maybe a week. Sarah's voice was steady now, running on pure maternal adrenaline. His dad was a motorcycle mechanic. He died 5 years ago. Toby's clearest memory of his father is the sound of engines. He wants to feel that sound one more time before he dies. He wants the vibration, the rumble. He wants to feel it in his chest. The bar was absolutely silent now. Even the jukebox seemed to have quieted. I live in Oakwood Meadows, Sarah continued. The HOA won't allow it. They threatened to fine me, to sue me. I don't care anymore. I'll sell my house. I'll go bankrupt. I don't care. I just need someone to help me give my son this one last thing. She lowered the phone. Please. Frank Gunnar Henderson had been sitting in the back corner, nursing a whiskey, trying to mind his own business. He was 55 years old, president of the Asphalt Reapers Motorcycle Club for the past decade, and he'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems was a good way to create your own. But that photo, that goddamn photo. He saw his grandson in that picture. Little Danny, who Gunnar hadn't seen in 3 years because of a stupid argument with his daughter, because of pride and stubbornness and all the things that seem important until they're not. Danny would be about Toby's age now. Gunnar didn't even know if Danny remembered him. Gunnar stood up. The movement drew everyone's attention. He was a big man, 6'3", with a gray beard and hands scarred from decades of wrenching on bikes and the occasional bar fight. His leather vest, his cut, in club terminology, bore the Asphalt Reapers patch, a skeleton riding a motorcycle made of flames. He walked toward Sarah, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Sarah tensed, suddenly aware that she was alone in a room full of strangers who could probably snap her like a twig. Gunnar stopped in front of her and looked down at the phone, at Toby's smile. He was quiet for a long moment. "What's the address?" he finally said. Sarah blinked. "What? Your address? Where does your boy live?" 1247, Oakwood Drive. "But the HOA." Gunnar held up a hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't give a damn about your HOA. He turned to the bar. "Who's riding Saturday?" Every hand in the room went up. Gunnar didn't do social media. He thought Facebook was for people who cared too much about other people's lunches, and Instagram was for people who took too many pictures of their own faces. But the Asphalt Reapers had a club page, maintained by a younger member named Spider, who understood hashtags and algorithms and all that digital nonsense. Friday night, after Sarah had left the bar with tears streaming down her face and gratitude in her voice, Gunnar had sat down with Spider. "I need you to put something on the internet," Gunnar said. Spider, a wiry 28-year-old with a tablet tattooed on his forearm, literally, looked up from his phone. "Sure, Prez. What's the message?" "Tell people we're riding for a kid. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Meet at the old Walmart lot off Route 9. Tell them to bring their loudest bikes. Tell them." Gunnar paused, searching for words. "Tell them no pipes, no glory." Spider grinned. "I can work with that." What Spider created was beautiful in its simplicity. He took a photo of Toby that Sarah had sent, not the smiling one, but a recent one that showed the reality. Toby lying in bed, pale as paper, oxygen tube in his nose, but with his eyes open and aware. Spider added text over the image. "Ride for Toby. Saturday, 10 a.m. 10-year-old boy dying of cancer. Last wish, to feel a motorcycle engine roar. Meet, Old Walmart, Route 9. No pipes, no glory. Share this. Ride this. Be there." He posted it to the Asphalt Reapers page at 11 p.m. Friday night. By midnight, it had 100 shares. By 2 a.m., 1,000. By sunrise Saturday morning, it had gone viral in every biker community from Maine to Florida. The thing about bikers, real bikers, not weekend warriors or cosplay enthusiasts, is that they take care of their own. And their own has a surprisingly broad definition. A kid dying of cancer who loved motorcycles? That kid was one of them. The shares spread like wildfire. Biker clubs from neighboring states saw the post and started making plans. The Iron Brotherhood out of Pittsburgh, the Road Ghosts from Virginia, the Chrome Disciples from upstate New York, Hell's Grannies, an all-woman club from Delaware whose members averaged 60 years old and scared the shit out of everyone. But it wasn't just clubs. Independent riders saw the post and felt something stir in their chests. The accountant who rode a Kawasaki on weekends. The nurse who had a Triumph in her garage. The retired teacher with a vintage Indian motorcycle. The construction worker who'd saved for 5 years to buy a Harley. They all saw Toby's face and made a decision. By Saturday morning at 9 a.m., the old Walmart parking lot was starting to fill up. Gunnar had expected maybe 50 riders. 100 would have been impressive. 200 would have been overwhelming. At 9:30 a.m., there were over 500 motorcycles in the lot. At 9:45, the number passed 1,000. At 10 a.m., when Gunnar climbed onto the hood of his pickup truck to address the crowd, there were just over 2,000 motorcycles packed into every available space, spilling out onto the access roads, filling the neighboring lots, creating a sea of chrome and steel that stretched as far as he could see. 2,000 bikes. Gunnar's hands shook as he looked out at the crowd. These weren't all club members. Most of them were strangers. But they'd all come for the same reason. "I don't have a speech prepared," Gunnar said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. I just want to say thank you. What we're about to do, this is what riding is really about. It's not about the bike you own or the club you're in. It's about showing up when it matters. He pulled out a piece of paper with Sarah's address. We're going to ride to Oakwood Meadows. It's about 15 minutes from here. The HOA tried to stop us. The police know we're coming. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know this. That boy is going to feel every goddamn one of these engines. A cheer went up, followed by the roar of 2,000 motorcycles starting simultaneously. The sound was apocalyptic. Patricia Gable had learned about the motorcycle rally at 7 a.m. Saturday morning when her phone started ringing off the hook. Board members, panicked residents, people who'd seen the Facebook post and recognized the Oakwood Meadows address. By 8 a.m., she'd called an emergency HOA meeting. By 9 a.m., she'd contacted the police, the mayor's office, and her lawyer. By 9:30, she'd secured an emergency restraining order barring any unauthorized gatherings in Oakwood Meadows. Patty stood in the community center's conference room, surrounded by the HOA board, 5 people who'd never expected their volunteer position to involve actual confrontation, and laid out her plan. The police will set up a roadblock at the main entrance, she said, pointing to a map of the neighborhood. No motorcycles will be allowed through. If they try to force entry, they'll be arrested for trespassing. Patty, said Tom Wainwright, the board's treasurer, a soft-spoken man who mostly attended meetings for the free coffee. Isn't this a bit extreme? It's a dying child. It's property values, Tom. Do you know what happens when a neighborhood becomes known as the place where bikers gather? Our houses lose 10, maybe 20% of their value overnight. I didn't work my entire life to build equity just to have it destroyed by these people. These people are trying to help. These people are criminals. Patty's voice was shrill now. Motorcycle gangs are involved in drugs, violence, all sorts of illegal activity. We cannot allow them into our community. It sets a precedent. The board exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody wanted to be the villain in this story, but nobody wanted to oppose Patty either. She was terrifying when crossed. At 9:45 a.m., Police Chief Daniel Morrison received his 4th call of the morning from Patricia Gable. Chief, they're gathering. I'm watching it on Facebook. There are hundreds of them. You need to set up that roadblock immediately. Morrison rubbed his temples. He was a week from retirement, and this was not how he wanted to spend his final days. Ms. Gable, I've reviewed the situation with the city attorney. What you're asking me to do, blocking a public road to prevent a peaceful gathering, that's legally questionable. I have a restraining order. You have a restraining order against a specific individual that was rushed through this morning and probably won't hold up under appeal. What you don't have is the authority to block access to an entire neighborhood. Morrison sighed. Look, I'll send a couple officers to monitor the situation. Make sure things stay peaceful. But I'm not setting up barricades to stop people from exercising their First Amendment rights. Their rights? What about our rights? What about our peace and quiet? Ma'am, it's one day. For a dying child. I suggest you close your windows and turn on some music. Morrison hung up before she could respond. He sat back in his chair and thought about his own grandson, healthy and loud and wonderfully alive. He thought about what he would do if his grandson had one last wish. Then he made a decision that would probably cost him any favor with the city council, but would let him sleep at night. He called his 2 most senior officers. I want you to go to Oakwood Meadows. Not to stop the motorcycles, to escort them. Traffic control. Make sure nobody gets hurt, no property gets damaged. Keep the peace. Sir, the HOA. I'll deal with the HOA. You deal with the bikers. And for God's sake, be respectful. These people are doing something good. Gunner's phone rang just as the massive convoy was beginning to organize itself into some semblance of order. He recognized the number. He'd given it to Sarah in case of emergencies. Mr. Henderson, this is Chief Morrison with the Oakwood Police. Do you have a moment? Gunner tensed. If you're calling to tell me not to come, I'm calling to tell you I'm sending 2 officers to escort you. Traffic control. Make sure everything stays safe and legal. There was a long pause. Gunner looked out at the sea of motorcycles. You're serious? Dead serious. I have one request. This needs to be organized, peaceful, and brief. You do your thing for the boy, and then you disperse. No extended rally, no burnouts, no antagonizing the HOA. Can you agree to that? Chief, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here for Toby. Then we won't have any problems. My officers will meet you at the Route 9 entrance to Oakwood. They'll lead you in, lead you out. The HOA is going to be unhappy, but that's my problem to deal with. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me. Just make that kid's day. At 10:15 a.m., the convoy began to move. 2,000 motorcycles, organized into a column that stretched for miles. At the front, Gunner rode his 1987 Harley-Davidson Softail, a bike he'd owned for 30 years and rebuilt 3 times. Next to him rode the senior members of the Asphalt Reapers. Behind them, the other clubs, arranged roughly by size and reputation. And behind them, the independent riders, the weekend warriors, the nurses and accountants and teachers and construction workers, all united by chrome and thunder. The sound of 2,000 motorcycles moving in formation is beyond description. It's not just noise, it's a physical phenomenon. Birds fled from trees. Car alarms triggered for blocks around. Windows rattled in their frames. The ground itself seemed to vibrate. People came out of their houses to watch. Some cheered. Some recorded on their phones. Some just stood in shock, unable to process the sheer scale of what they were seeing. The convoy moved at a steady 20 miles per hour, following the police escort. Chief Morrison had sent his 2 best officers, Martinez and Chun, both of whom had teenage sons and understood what this meant. Officer Martinez led on his motorcycle, lights flashing. The convoy followed like a steel river. Oakwood Meadows was not prepared for this. The subdivision had been designed for quiet suburban life, tree-lined streets, speed bumps every 100 yards, a neighborhood watch program that mostly involved complaining about lawn care. The streets were narrow, built for sedans and SUVs, not for thousands of motorcycles. At 10:40 a.m., the first rumbles could be heard from blocks away. Patricia Gable stood in her living room, phone in hand, watching through her window as the sound grew louder and louder and impossibly louder. Then she saw them. The column of motorcycles turned onto Main Street, Oakwood's primary thoroughfare, and the street transformed. What had been a quiet Saturday morning became an invasion of chrome and leather and sound. The motorcycles filled every available space, packed shoulder to shoulder, extending back as far as Patty could see. She frantically dialed the police. Chief Morrison, they're here. Thousands of them. I know, Miss Gable. My officers are with them. Everything is under control. Under control? Have you seen this? This is an invasion. Ma'am, I suggest you stay inside and let this happen. It'll be over in less than an hour. Patty slammed the phone down and looked out at the stream of motorcycles. Her hands were shaking with rage and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like fear. Not fear of violence, but fear of irrelevance. Fear of being steamrolled by something bigger than herself, bigger than her rules and regulations and property values. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be in control. 2 blocks away, Sarah Miller stood at her living room window, tears already streaming down her face. She could hear them coming. The sound was like distant thunder at first, then growing, building, becoming something massive and unstoppable. The windows began to vibrate. Picture frames buzzed against the wall. The medications on the kitchen counter started to rattle. Mom. Toby's voice was weak, questioning. Sarah ran to his room. Toby was awake, more awake than he'd been in days. His eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. Are they coming? He asked. Really? Oh baby, yes. They're really coming. Sarah had prepared everything. With the help of 2 hospice nurses, women who understood that sometimes medicine isn't found in pills, she'd moved Toby's hospital bed directly in front of the large living room window. They'd opened the window fully, removing the screen. Cool autumn air flowed in, carrying with it the growing sound of 2,000 approaching engines. Toby was wrapped in blankets, oxygen tube in place, morphine pump within reach. But his eyes were focused, alert, waiting. The sound grew louder, closer. The convoy turned onto Oakwood Drive, and reality shifted. Officer Martinez pulled his motorcycle to the side, creating space, and the river of bikes began to flow past Sarah's house. The sound went from loud to overwhelming to something beyond human perception. This wasn't mere noise. This was sonic assault, beautiful and terrible and perfect. The physical effects were immediate and extraordinary. Every window on the street rattled in its frame. Car alarms shrieked to life. Loose roof shingles vibrated. A basketball left in someone's driveway began to slowly roll downhill, driven by the vibration. Dogs barked frantically or hid under beds. Small children cried or laughed, depending on temperament. The lead bike slowed as they approached Toby's house. Gunnar raised his fist, a signal. The entire convoy downshifted simultaneously, dropping into a lower gear that created a deeper, more primal rumble. 2,000 motorcycles in low gear, engines tuned for maximum volume, exhaust modified to be as loud as legally possible, and sometimes louder. The sound wave hit Toby's house like a tsunami. Inside, Sarah stood next to Toby's bed, her hand on his shoulder, feeling him vibrate. Not just hearing the sound, being the sound. The floor buzzed beneath their feet. The walls hummed. The air itself seemed to ripple. Toby's eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a gasp of pure joy. This was it. This was what he'd been desperately trying to remember, trying to recapture. This was the feeling of his father's garage, amplified 1,000 times. This was the voice of engines, the language of machines, the physical manifestation of power and life and strength. Sarah watched as color bloomed in Toby's pale cheeks for the first time in weeks. His fingers, which had been still and weak, began to move, curling slightly, reaching toward the window as if he could touch the sound. Gunnar brought his Harley to a stop directly in front of the house, so close to the window that he could see inside. He saw the hospital bed, the medical equipment, the pale child wrapped in blankets. And he saw Toby's face, thin, wasted by disease, but transformed by wonder. For a moment, Gunnar's throat tightened. This could have been Danny. This could have been any child, any grandson, any son. But it was Toby, and Toby was running out of time, and this moment was all they had. Gunnar looked back at the seemingly endless column of motorcycles behind him. Riders of every description, club members in full colors, weekend warriors in new leather, gray-haired veterans, and young kids barely old enough to have licenses. All of them here for this moment. He raised his hand high, holding it there, letting the anticipation build. The convoy rumbled at idle, a low growl that was still loud enough to shake windows. Then Gunnar dropped his hand and simultaneously twisted his throttle. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 2,000 riders followed his lead, every single one of them twisting their throttles wide open. The sound that resulted defied description. It wasn't just loud. Loud was inadequate, a word too small to contain what happened. This was a physical assault, a wall of sound that could be felt in bones and organs. The air pressure changed noticeably. Birds fled from trees for blocks around. Every car alarm on the street triggered. Windows cracked, actually cracked, from the vibration. The sound wave hit with almost visible force. Inside the house, Toby felt the world explode. The sound came through the open window like a living thing, like something with weight and substance. It crashed into his chest with actual physical force. His ribcage vibrated. His organs vibrated. His bones, even the ones riddled with cancer, vibrated. For months, Toby had felt himself getting colder, quieter, more distant from the world. The cancer was taking everything warm and vital and replacing it with ice and silence. Every day was a little more distant, a little more muffled, like the world was moving further away from him. But now, now, the world came roaring back. The vibration traveled through his chest cavity, stimulating his heart, which responded by beating harder. Blood, sluggish and tired, surged through vessels. His lungs, damaged by cancer, expanded more fully than they had in weeks. Even his brain, clouded by morphine and disease, suddenly snapped into crystal clarity. This was what being alive felt like. Sarah watched, amazed, as Toby's entire body responded. The pallor in his face faded slightly. His eyes, which had been dull and distant, suddenly focused with laser intensity. His mouth opened, not in pain, but in something like ecstasy. And then Toby did something he hadn't done in over a month. He laughed. It was a small sound, lost completely in the overwhelming roar of engines, but Sarah saw it. She saw joy break across her son's face like sunrise. She saw him fully present, fully alive, fully Toby in a way he hadn't been since before the diagnosis. The roar continued for 10 full minutes. Gunnar kept his throttle pinned, his engine screaming, pouring every ounce of power into creating sound. Behind him, 2,000 riders did the same. Some motorcycles were newer, smoother, designed for comfort. Some were vintage, temperamental, requiring constant throttle adjustment. Some were massive touring bikes with engines bigger than most car motors. Some were smaller, sportier, higher-pitched. But together, they created a symphony of mechanical thunder that had never been heard before and would never be heard again. Gunnar watched through the window. He saw Toby reaching toward the sound, toward the vibration, toward life itself. And he saw himself in that gesture, reaching for something lost, something precious, something that couldn't be regained but could at least be honored. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. The moment stretched, became infinite. There was only the sound, the vibration, the pure kinetic energy of 2,000 engines expressing love in the only language they knew. Inside, Toby closed his eyes and let the vibration fill him completely. He imagined his father in the garage, imagined Marcus turning the key, imagined the engine coughing to life. But this was bigger than that memory. This was 2,000 fathers, 2,000 engines, 2,000 voices, all saying the same thing. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You matter. Tears ran down Toby's cheeks, mixing with the oxygen tube, soaking into his pillowcase. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fulfillment, of completion, of a desperate wish granted beyond all reasonable hope. Sarah knelt beside the bed, her arms around her son, feeling him vibrate in her embrace. She whispered into his ear, though he couldn't possibly hear her over the roar. Your dad is here, baby. All these people, they're all your dad. They all came to see you. At exactly 11 minutes, Gunnar released his throttle. The signal rippled backward through the convoy. One by one, 2,000 motorcycles dropped back to idle. The sudden relative silence was almost shocking. The world seemed muffled, distant. Ears rang. Hearts pounded. The absence of the roar was almost as powerful as the roar itself. Gunnar killed his engine completely. Behind him, understanding the signal, the other riders did the same. The silence spread backward through the convoy like a wave until the entire street was quiet except for the soft ticking of cooling engines. Gunnar swung his leg off his bike and walked toward the house. Sarah met him at the door, her face wet with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can I see him? Sarah nodded and led Gunnar to the window. Toby was still awake, still alert, though clearly exhausted by the intensity of what had just happened. When he saw Gunnar, a weak smile crossed his face. Gunnar looked down at this child he'd never met before today, this boy who'd brought 2,000 strangers together, and felt something break open in his chest. Without thinking, he reached up and unpinned the patch from his leather vest, the Asphalt Reaper's president patch that he'd worn for 10 years, that represented everything he was in this community. He held it up to the window, pressed it against the glass so Toby could see clearly. This is for you, brother. You're one of us now. He placed the patch on the windowsill, gave a slow, deliberate salute, the kind of salute you give to someone who's earned respect through courage, and turned away. The departure was unlike any motorcycle rally anyone had ever seen. Out of respect for Toby, who needed to rest, the riders didn't restart their engines. Instead, they pushed their bikes, some weighing over 800 pounds, by hand, rolling them silently down the street until they were several blocks away. 2,000 people, pushing 2,000 motorcycles in complete silence. It took over an hour. Neighbors came out to watch, moved by the sight. Some offered to help push. Others just stood in respect. Even Patricia Gable, watching from her window, felt something shift in her chest, something uncomfortable that might have been shame. Only when they reached the edge of Oakwood Meadows did the riders restart their engines. And then, with a final coordinating roar that shook the trees one last time, they dispersed, back to their regular lives, their regular identities, carrying with them the memory of what they'd accomplished. That night, Toby Miller lay in his bed, Gunnar's president patch clutched in his thin fingers, and felt more at peace than he had in months. The excitement had exhausted him. The morphine was wearing off, and pain was creeping back in, the cold, heavy pain that lived in his bones and lungs. But there was something else too, something warm and solid that the pain couldn't quite reach. He'd felt it. He'd felt the thunder. He'd felt his father. Sarah sat beside the bed, holding his free hand, humming softly. Outside, the street was quiet again. The motorcycles were gone, dispersed back to wherever they'd come from. But the memory remained, permanent and precious. Mom, Toby whispered. Yes, baby. I'm not cold anymore. Sarah's tears came fresh, but she smiled through them. No, no, I'm warm. I can feel. He struggled for words. I can feel Dad. He's here. He came with all those bikes. His eyes, heavy with exhaustion and medication, found hers. He's going to take me home now. Sarah's heart broke and mended simultaneously. Okay, baby. That's okay. I'm not scared anymore. I know. Tell those people thank you. All of them. Tell them they gave me Dad back. I will. I promise. Toby Miller died at 3:47 a.m. on Sunday morning. The hospice nurse confirmed that his passing was peaceful, without struggle. His final vitals showed something unusual. His heart rate had spiked one last time, briefly, as if responding to some unheard call. Then it had simply stopped, gently, like an engine finally allowed to rest. When Sarah called Gunnar the next morning to tell him, her voice was steadier than it had been in months. He wasn't afraid at the end, she said. He said he was warm. He said you all gave him his father back. Gunnar, sitting in his garage with his phone pressed to his ear, couldn't speak for a long moment. Finally, we gave him what we could, ma'am. I just wish it could have been more. It was everything, Sarah said. It was exactly everything. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. But outside the funeral home, lining both sides of the street, stood over 100 motorcycles and their riders. They'd come without being asked, wearing their cleanest cuts, standing in respectful silence. When the hearse emerged, they started their engines. Not a roar this time, but a low, respectful rumble, a final salute, an escort to wherever Toby was going next. Sarah stood at the funeral home door and looked out at the line of riders. These strangers who'd become family. These rough men and women with their leather and tattoos who'd shown more compassion than her entire neighborhood combined. She raised her hand in acknowledgement. As one, every rider placed their right fist over their heart, the biker's sign of respect, of brotherhood, of solidarity. Then they were gone, rumbling off into the autumn afternoon, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the memory of what happens when enough people decide that kindness matters more than convenience. 3 months later, Gunnar Henderson sat at a coffee shop, nervously stirring his coffee. He'd driven 6 hours for this meeting, unsure if he was doing the right thing, but knowing he had to try. The door opened, and his daughter Jennifer walked in, followed by a small boy with curious eyes. Danny, his grandson. Jennifer's expression was guarded, uncertain. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the argument. But she'd seen the video. Everyone had seen the video. Someone had recorded the motorcycle rally for Toby, and it had gone viral, accumulating millions of views. Jennifer had recognized her father at the front of the pack. Dad, she said carefully. Jenny. Gunnar stood, unsure of protocol. Then he looked down at Danny. Hey, buddy. Danny looked at his mother, who nodded permission. Grandpa, the word hit Gunnar like a truck. He knelt down, eye level with the boy. Yeah, that's me. Mom showed me the video. With all the motorcycles. She said you did that for a sick kid. I did. Well, a lot of people did. That was cool. Gunnar felt something wet on his cheek and realized he was crying. He didn't bother to hide it. Danny, I'm sorry I've been gone. I'm sorry I let stupid things keep me away. I'd like to, if it's okay with your mom, I'd like to be in your life again. Jennifer's guard dropped slightly. That video, Dad. When I saw you there, organizing all those people for a child you didn't even know. That's the father I remember. The one who shows up when it matters. I want to be that person again. For both of you. Jennifer looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw something different from the stubborn, distant man she'd been fighting with for years. She saw someone who'd been broken open by grief and put back together by purpose. Okay, she said quietly. We can try. Gunnar pulled his grandson into a hug, and over the boy's shoulder, he mouthed thank you to his daughter. And he thought of Toby Miller, a boy he'd met for only moments, but who had changed everything. A boy who, in dying, had taught him how to live again. 2 years later, the Ride for Toby had become an annual event. Every year on the anniversary of that Saturday, bikers from across the country gathered to ride for children fighting cancer. The event raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for pediatric oncology research. Sarah Miller spoke at every gathering, telling Toby's story, keeping his memory alive. But the real legacy wasn't the money or the awareness. It was the connections, the reconciliations, the moments of grace. It was Gunnar and his grandson, now inseparable, The old man teaching the young boy about engines and life and showing up when it matters. It was Patricia Gable, who'd resigned from the HOA and now volunteered at the local children's hospital. It was the 2,000 riders who'd learned that their bikes could be instruments of healing, not just transportation. It was every parent who held their child a little tighter, every person who chose compassion over convenience, every moment when someone decided that rules mattered less than hearts. Toby Miller had lived for 10 years and 3 days. In that brief time, he'd touched thousands of lives, changed them, improved them, saved some of them. His last wish, to feel an engine roar, had created a thunderclap that echoed far beyond that Saturday morning, beyond that street, beyond anything anyone could have imagined. And somewhere, in whatever place children go when they leave this world too soon, Toby Miller smiled and felt the vibration of 2,000 engines, forever thundering, forever warm, forever home.